The only sound in my apartment was the wet, rhythmic slap of rain against the window pane, a steady drum beat that matched the hollow thud in my chest. I was sitting on the floor, my back against the cold wood of the front door, pulling my oversized wool sweater tight around my knees. Scattered around me like drops of blood were the petals of a dozen red roses. I'd spent the last hour meticulously deconstructing the bouquet that had appeared this morning, searching for a note, a name, anything that would prove someone in this city actually saw me. I stared at the soft glow of the fairy lights draped over my bookshelf, their warmth feeling like a cruel joke. It was nearly midnight. The city was drowning in a winter storm, and I was exactly where I had been for the last 2 years, hiding in the dark, clutching the remains of a ghost's affection. My laptop sat dark on the kitchen table, a reminder of the remote data entry life I'd built to ensure I never had to look a stranger in the eye. After the betrayal that had shattered my world, after the people I loved most showed me just how easily I could be discarded, I had perfected the art of being invisible. I didn't go out. I didn't let people in. I'd convinced myself that this solitude was a fortress, a way to stay safe from the inevitable sting of being unwanted. It was a life that felt like holding my breath underwater. I wasn't drowning, but I certainly wasn't breathing. I reached out to touch a fallen petal, my fingers trembling slightly, when a heavy, rhythmic thud vibrated through the door behind my head. I froze. 3 strikes. Low, powerful, and demanding. My pulse spiked, a sharp contrast to the stagnant air of the room. Nobody came here. My groceries were left at the curb. My mail was a series of digital pings. I scrambled to my feet, my breath hitching as I pressed my eye to the peephole. Outside, the hallway's dim yellow light was swallowed by a massive shadow. A man stood there, seemingly immune to the freezing sleet that clung to his dark overcoat. He didn't look like a delivery driver or a neighbor. He stood with a terrifying, coiled stillness, his jaw set in a hard marble line. "Who is it?" I called out, the words catching in my dry throat. "Open the door, Nina Keith." His voice didn't shake. It resonated, deep and heavy, with an accent that tasted of old-world authority and cold steel. The fact that he knew my name should have sent me running for the window, but there was something in his tone, a strange, restrained intensity that pinned me to the spot. "I don't know you," I managed to say, my hand hovering over the deadbolt. "No, you don't," he replied, his voice dropping an octave, sounding closer now as if he were leaning against the wood. "But the men who left those roses on your mat know exactly who you are, and they aren't coming back to bring you more flowers. They're coming to see how much you're worth to me." My heart didn't just stutter, it stopped. I looked down at the red petals on the floor. I had thought they were a promise of love. Looking at the silhouette of the man through the glass, I realized they were actually a countdown. I turned the lock. The door didn't just open, it felt like the seal on my vacuum-packaged life had been punctured, letting in a rush of freezing, violent air. I stood there, clutching the collar of my sweater, feeling impossibly small as Sungmin Mino stepped across the threshold. He didn't wait for an invitation. He moved with a heavy, predatory grace, his presence instantly shrinking the room until the walls of my sanctuary felt like the bars of a cage. He stopped just a few feet from me. Up close, the devastating quality of his face was almost painful to look at. His features were sharp, disciplined, and utterly cold, save for the dark intensity in his eyes that seemed to be cataloging every tremor in my hands. The sleet on his overcoat began to melt in the warmth of my living room, dripping onto the floor and mixing with the fallen rose petals. Red on white. It looked like a crime scene in the making. 13, he said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that skipped down my spine.
What? I whispered. 13 bouquets, one every 3 days for over a month. He looked down at the mangled flowers by my feet, his lip curling in a faint, dry expression that wasn't quite a smile. You thought you had a secret admirer. You thought someone was finally looking at you with something other than pity or indifference. The accuracy of his words stung more than the cold. My face burned with a sudden, sharp humiliation. I had spent weeks romanticizing those roses, imagining a faceless man who loved me from afar, someone who understood my silence. To hear it spoken aloud by a man who radiated such lethal reality made me feel like a child caught playing dress-up. "How do you know that?" I asked, my voice gaining a fragile edge of defiance. "Who are you to come into my home and tell me what my life is?" Sangmin took a step closer. He was so tall I had to tilt my head back, exposing the pulse jumping in my throat. He smelled of expensive tobacco, rain, and something metallic, something like ozone before a lightning strike. "I am the man who has been paying the interest on your father's ghost," he said. His hand reached out, not to touch me, but to pluck a single red petal from my shoulder. He held it between 2 fingers, crushing the delicate silk into a dark stain. "Your father didn't just leave you with a broken heart, Nina. He left you with a debt to the Mino family. I've kept the collectors away because I don't enjoy watching civilians break. But my patience has made me look soft to my enemies. They've realized that the easiest way to hurt me isn't to put a bullet in my chest. It's to take the one thing I've been quietly protecting." I backed away until my calves hit the edge of the sofa. "I don't even know you. I'm not yours to protect." "The Viper Syndicate doesn't care about the nuances of our relationship," he countered, his eyes locking onto mine with an unwavering focus. "To them, you are a target painted in red. Those roses, they weren't a romantic gesture. They were a marking, a way for their scouts to confirm you were home, to track your routine, to ensure that when they finally come to collect, they won't miss." A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the apartment, casting his shadow long and jagged across the floor. In that split second, I saw the truth of him, the way his hand rested near the opening of his coat, the way his eyes never stopped scanning the windows. He wasn't just a stranger, he was a shield, and if he was here, it meant the shield was about to be hit. "Why tell me this now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why show up at midnight?" "Because the time for quiet protection ended 10 minutes ago," Sangmin said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a phone. He tapped the screen and slid it across the coffee table toward me. On the screen was a grainy night vision feed from a camera I didn't know existed outside my building. 2 black SUVs were idling at the curb, their headlights off. 4 men were stepping out, their faces obscured by masks, their hands holding objects that were unmistakably heavy and metallic. "They're here," I breathed, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp hiss. "They're here," he confirmed, his voice chillingly calm. He reached out then, his fingers closing firmly around my forearm. His grip wasn't cruel, but it was absolute. "You have 2 choices, Nina. You can stay in this room and wait for them to finish what they started with those roses, or you can come with me and enter a world you won't be able to leave. But I promise you this, if you step through that door with me, you will never be invisible again." I looked at the roses on the floor, the beautiful, lying things I had cherished. Then I looked at Sangmin. He was dangerous, terrifying, and the only real thing I had touched in years. Outside, the first heavy thud of a boot hit the downstairs entrance. "Go," I whispered, my fingers lacing into the dark fabric of his sleeve. "Take me away from here." Sangmin didn't waste a second. He pulled me toward the door, leaving the warmth and the fairy lights behind, stepping out into the freezing, beautiful danger of the night. The door clicked shut behind him, but the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, charged with the kinetic energy of a man who lived his life in the crosshairs. Sang-min didn't move toward the plush comfort of my sofa. Instead, he prowled the perimeter of the room, his shadows stretching long and jagged against the warm amber glow of my fairy lights. He looked entirely out of place, a dark obsidian blade dropped into a box of soft velvet. I stood frozen by the door, my fingers still tingling from where his hand had brushed mine. "You're lying," I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. "The roses, they've been coming for weeks, every 3 days like clockwork. Why would an enemy send flowers?" Sang-min stopped at the window, his back to me. He didn't look out through the glass. He stood to the side, peering through the gap in the curtains with a clinical, detached focus. "Because the Viper Syndicate doesn't believe in the messy uncertainty of a sudden hit," he said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly calm register. "They believe in the hunt, in the psychological erosion of their target." He turned his head slightly, the sharp line of his profile caught in the blue light of the storm outside. 13 bouquets, Nina. In their world, 13 is the number of the ghost. It's a signal to every other crew in the city that this house, this woman, is claimed for execution. It's a marking system. The first bouquet was the sighting. The 6th was the confirmation of your schedule. The 13th? He paused, his dark eyes moving to the scattered red petals on my floor. The 13th is the invitation to the kill. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold numbness spreading from my chest to my fingertips. The romantic fantasy I'd built, the one thing that had made me feel special in my sea of isolation, was being systematically dismantled. The roses weren't a promise that I was loved, they were a receipt for my life. "I've spent 2 years protecting you from a distance because I thought you deserved a life that didn't smell like gunpowder," Sang-min said, stepping away from the window and moving toward me. "But they found the link. They found the ledger of your father's debt and realized that I hadn't collected. In my world, mercy is a scent, and right now, you smell like my greatest weakness." I felt a sudden sharp spike of indignation cut through my fear. "I didn't ask for your protection. I didn't ask to be anyone's weakness." "You don't get a choice in who chooses to hunt you," he snapped, the first flash of raw emotion breaking through his restrained exterior. Suddenly, the hum of the city outside changed. The steady hiss of the rain was punctuated by the low, guttural growl of an engine idling too close to my building. My instinct was to run to the window to see if the secret admirer I'd imagined was actually the monster he described. I took 2 hurried steps toward the glass, my hand reaching for the curtain. "No!" Sang-min's voice cracked like a whip. Before my fingers could touch the fabric, he was there. He moved with a speed that defied his size, his hand lashing out to catch my waist. He didn't just stop me, he hauled me backward, his strength absolute and startling. I gasped as my back hit the hard wall of his chest. His other arm came across my shoulders, pinning me against him, pulling me into the deep shadow of the corner, away from the line of sight of the street below. The physical tension was immediate and suffocating. I could feel the rapid, steady thrum of his heart against my shoulder blades, the heat of his body radiating through his damp overcoat and soaking into my thin sweater. He was solid, unyielding, and smelled intensely of cold rain and expensive sandalwood. For a woman who hadn't been touched in years, the proximity was an electric shock to my system. "Don't," he hissed against my ear, his breath hot against my skin. "Never stand in front of a window when you've been marked. You're giving them the angle they need." I was hyper-aware of his thumb pressing into the soft flesh of my waist, of the way his height completely eclipsed me. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not just from the fear of the men outside, but from the raw masculine gravity of the man holding me. "They're here, aren't they?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Sang-min didn't answer with words. He reached down and gripped my hand,
his fingers lacing through mine with a proprietary force. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable but his eyes burning with a dark, protective fire. "The roses are dead, Nina," he said, his voice a low promise. "Now we see if you can handle the thorns." He pulled me toward the back exit, and for the first time in my life, I realized that safety wasn't a closed door, it was the man who held the key to the cage. The transition from safety to survival was shorter than I ever imagined. Sang-min didn't give me time to mourn the life I was leaving behind. He moved through my apartment with the efficiency of a storm, his eyes cutting through the dim light to identify the exits. I stood in the center of the room, my hands shaking as I grabbed a small leather backpack from the hook by the door. "5 minutes, Nina," he said, his voice low and serrated. "Take what you can't live without, forget the rest." I looked around my small, suffocating sanctuary. 2 years of carefully curated isolation were represented in these 4 walls. I grabbed a tattered photo of my parents, my laptop, and a heavy wool coat. I bypassed the jewelry and the expensive gadgets. In the presence of a man like Sang-min, the only currency that mattered was utility. As I shoved a handful of basics into the bag, my eyes landed on the fallen rose petals. I felt a pang of grief for the girl who had been sitting on this floor just 10 minutes ago, dreaming of a secret admirer. That girl was dead now, replaced by someone who was currently being hunted by a syndicate. "I'm ready," I whispered, my voice sounding foreign in the quiet room. Sang-min didn't nod. He simply reached out, his hand sliding into mine, his palm warm and calloused. He led me toward the service stairs, avoiding the main elevator. We descended in a blur of concrete and flickering fluorescent lights, the air growing colder with every flight. When we reached the ground floor, he paused, his body tensing as he listened to the rain lashing against the metal exit door. He pushed the door open, and the winter storm hit me like a physical blow. The rain was freezing, turning to sleet as it touched the ground. A sleek, matte black SUV was idling at the curb, its engine a low, predatory purr. Sang-min didn't run. He moved with a controlled, terrifying speed, shielding my body with his own as he ushered me into the back seat. The door clicked shut, sealing out the sound of the rain, but the tension inside the car was even thicker. A driver sat in the front, his eyes meeting Sang-min's in the rearview mirror for a silent second before he shifted into gear. We peeled away from the curb just as a set of headlights turned onto my street, the glare reflecting off the wet pavement like a predator's eyes. I pressed my forehead against the cool leather of the headrest, watching my apartment building shrink into the distance. I was leaving the shell I'd built to keep the world out, but as I looked at the man sitting beside me, I realized I hadn't actually escaped. I had just moved into a different kind of cage. The drive was silent. The city lights eventually faded, replaced by the dark skeletal shapes of trees as we climbed higher into the hills. Sang-min sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, his profile as unyielding as the mountains. Every time the car hit a bump, our shoulders would brush and a jolt of electricity would shoot through me, a reminder of the raw, masculine gravity that now anchored my life.
Finally, we reached the gates. They were massive, iron-wrought structures that looked like they belonged to a medieval fortress rather than a modern estate. As they swung open, I caught a glimpse of the sprawling stone mansion perched on the edge of a cliff. It was a place of dark beauty and absolute security, a gilded prison designed to keep the world at bay. The car came to a stop in the sweeping driveway. Sang-min turned to me, his dark eyes searching mine in the shadows. "You're safe here, Nina," he said, his voice a low, gravelly promise. "But remember, out there you were a ghost. In here you belong to me, and I don't lose what's mine." He stepped out of the car, leaving me to stare at the fortress.
I had left my small life behind, but as I stepped out into the freezing night air, I knew that the real danger hadn't stayed in Brooklyn. It was standing right in front of me, waiting to show me exactly what it meant to be claimed. The heavy iron doors of the estate groaned shut behind us, a final echoing thud that sounded like a lid closing on a box. If my apartment in Brooklyn had been a shell, this place was a fortress carved from obsidian and shadow. As Sang-min led me through the soaring foyer, the sheer scale of the architecture made my breath hitch. Everything was sharp angles, polished marble, and cold, expansive spaces that seemed designed to swallow a person whole. There were no fairy lights here, no cluttered bookshelves or worn-out cushions. The air didn't smell like the vanilla candles I used to burn to ward off the loneliness. It smelled of floor wax, old money, and the faint, biting scent of gun oil. "Marco," Sang-min called out, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. A man appeared from the shadows of a side hallway, lean, alert, and wearing a suit that looked as much like a uniform as Sang-min's did. He gave me a brief, assessing glance that made me feel like a suspicious package before nodding to Sang-min. "The perimeter is secure, boss. The guests from the city followed us to the bridge, but they didn't cross," Marco reported. "Double the watch," Sang-min commanded, his tone clipped, "and prepare the West Suite. Miss Keith will be staying there indefinitely." He turned to me then, his dark eyes tracing the way I was shivering in my oversized sweater. Against the backdrop of this brutalist luxury, I looked absurd. My soft socks and messy hair were a vivid protest against the hard, lethal world he inhabited. "You look like you're about to break," he remarked, his voice softening just a fraction, though his posture remained as rigid as a soldier's. "Follow me, you need to sleep." He led me up a grand staircase that felt like it belonged in a museum. We passed rooms filled with high-tech monitors and men who stood in doorways with a coiled intensity I had only ever seen in movies. This wasn't a home, it was a command center. Every detail, from the reinforced glass of the windows to the silent professional movements of the staff, shouted that life here was a constant state of war. We reached a heavy oak door at the end of a long gallery. Sang-min pushed it open, revealing a suite that was as beautiful as it was intimidating. The bed was massive, draped in charcoal linens, and a fireplace flickered with a low, controlled flame. It was the most comfortable room I had ever been in, yet it felt utterly dangerous. "There are clothes in the dressing room, everything you might need," Sang-min said, standing in the doorway but refusing to enter. It was the first time I noticed a boundary he wouldn't cross, an invisible line of respect, or perhaps a calculated distance. I dropped my backpack on the floor, the sound muffled by the thick rug. "Is it always like this for you?" I asked, turning to face him. "Living like you're waiting for the world to explode?" Sang-min leaned against the doorframe, the flickering firelight catching the sharp edge of his jaw and the cold, distant look in his eyes. "In my world, Nina, the explosion is the only thing you can count on. Peace is just the time between the fuses." He stepped back into the hallway, his hand lingering on the heavy brass handle. "The doors in this house lock from the inside. Use them. If you need anything, press the button on the bedside console. A ghost will answer." "A ghost?" I repeated. "One of my men," he clarified, a shadow of a grim smile touching his lips. "They're trained to be invisible until they're needed, just like you used to be." Before I could respond, he pulled the door shut. I heard the soft click of the mechanism, and for the first time in hours, I was truly alone. I walked over to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet curtain. Outside, the storm was still raging, the rain lashing against the reinforced glass. Down in the courtyard, I could see the silhouette of a man in an overcoat, a rifle slung over his shoulder, pacing the perimeter in the dark. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the silk sheets feeling cold against my skin. In my apartment, I had been lonely, but I had been the master of my own silence. Here, surrounded by guards and marble and the heavy gravity of Sangmin Mino, the silence felt like it was waiting for something. I lay back, staring up at the dark ceiling, realizing that I had traded my soft, suffocating life for a sharp, dangerous one. I was no longer a target marked by roses, but I was something else now. I was a guest in the beast's den, and as I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, I realized I wasn't sure which one was more terrifying. Morning light in the estate was not the warm, golden hue of my Brooklyn apartment. It was a sharp, clinical silver that cut through the heavy velvet curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the cold air. I awoke with a start, my heart racing before I remembered where I was. I hadn't slept so much as I had succumbed to exhaustion, and the transition into consciousness felt like a bruising fall back to reality. I found Sangmin in a glass-walled conservatory that overlooked a jagged cliffside. He wasn't wearing the overcoat today. Instead, he wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the corded muscle of his forearms and a glimpse of a dark, intricate tattoo that disappeared beneath his cuff. He was drinking tea, staring out at the mist clinging to the trees with a look of profound, weary isolation. "Sit," he said, not turning around. He didn't need to see me. He seemed to feel the very air in the room change when I entered. I took the seat across from him, feeling acutely aware of my borrowed silk robe and the way my hair felt like a tangled nest. A maid I hadn't heard enter placed a cup of tea in front of me and vanished just as quickly. "You told me last night that my father left a debt. My father was a librarian. He lived for first editions and quiet afternoons. He didn't belong in a world that uses roses as death sentences." Sangmin finally turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were the color of flint, hard and unyielding. "In my world, Nina, the explosion is the only thing you can count on. Peace is just the time between the fuses." He stepped back into the hallway, his hand lingering on the heavy brass handle. "The doors in this house lock from the inside. Use them. If you need anything, press the button on the bedside console. A ghost will answer." "A ghost?" I repeated. "One of my men," he clarified, a shadow of a grim smile touching his lips. "They're trained to be invisible until they're needed, just like you used to be." Before I could respond, he pulled the door shut. I heard the soft click of the mechanism, and for the first time in hours, I was truly alone. I walked over to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet curtain. Outside, the storm was still raging, the rain lashing against the reinforced glass. Down in the courtyard, I could see the silhouette of a man in an overcoat, a rifle slung over his shoulder, pacing the perimeter in the dark. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the silk sheets feeling cold against my skin. In my apartment, I had been lonely, but I had been the master of my own silence. Here, surrounded by guards and marble and the heavy gravity of Sangmin Mino, the silence felt like it was waiting for something. I lay back, staring up at the dark ceiling, realizing that I had traded my soft, suffocating life for a sharp, dangerous one. I was no longer a target marked by roses, but I was something else now. I was a guest in the beast's den, and as I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, I realized I wasn't sure which one was more terrifying.
He reached into a leather folder on the table and slid a yellowed piece of paper toward me. It was a promissory note, dated 15 years ago. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable, my father's elegant, loopy script. But it wasn't a bank loan. It was a private contract with the Mino family. "He didn't borrow money for himself," Sangmin said, his voice dropping into that low, resonant frequency that made my skin prickle. "He borrowed it to pay for your mother's experimental treatments when the insurance ran dry. He traded his soul to give her 3 more years of life. and when he couldn't pay it back, the debt didn't vanish. It just sat in my father's ledger, gathering interest like a cancer. I stared at the paper, the ink blurring as my eyes filled with tears. I remembered those 3 years. I remembered the way my father had smiled, despite the exhaustion, telling me everything was going to be fine. I had thought it was a miracle. I didn't know it was a transaction. "My father passed away 5 years ago," I whispered. "Why are you only coming for it now?" "I'm not coming for the debt, Nina. I'm the one who buried it," Sangmin said. He leaned forward, the scent of sandalwood and something sharper, something like old paper and gunpowder, enveloping me. "When I took over the family business, I saw the file. I saw the girl who had lost everyone and decided to build a wall around herself. I told my collectors to strike the name Keith from the books. I thought if I left you alone, if I kept the shadow of my world from touching yours, you might actually find a way to be happy." He paused, a shadow of something that looked like regret flickering across his face. "For 5 years, I've had men stationed near your apartment, not to intimidate you, but to ensure that anyone who came looking for that old debt found me instead. I was the silent partner in your solitude." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The safety I had cherished, the quiet life I thought I had built with my own 2 hands, had been a gift from a man I didn't even know existed. I wasn't an independent survivor. I was a project, a secret held by a Mafia boss. "You've been watching me for 5 years?" I asked, a mix of gratitude and horror rising in my throat. "I've been protecting you for 5 years," he corrected, his voice hard. "But my silence was a mistake. The Viper Syndicate found the original ledger. They realized that by leaving the debt unpaid, I had left a crack in my own armor. They aren't after the money, Nina. They're after the fact that I cared enough to hide you." He stood up, the movement abrupt and imposing. He walked to the window, his silhouette dark against the silver morning. "You thought you were alone in that apartment. You weren't. You were just under my wing. And now that the wing has been clipped, the only place left for you to hide is right here, with me."
I looked at my tea, the steam rising in delicate swirls. My father's love had been bought with a debt, and my safety had been bought with Sangmin's silence. I realized then that I had never truly been free. I had just been traded from one kind of protection to another. "What happens now?" I asked. Sangmin turned back to me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes pinned me to the chair with a terrifying intensity. "Now," he said, "we stop hiding. We wait for them to realize that marking you was the last mistake they will ever make." The estate fell into a restless, heavy quiet as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, leaving the hallways bathed in long, skeletal shadows. I found myself wandering toward the west wing, drawn by the scent of old paper and beeswax. I pushed open the double mahogany doors of the library, expecting to find the same cold, museum-like vacuum that filled the rest of the house. Instead, I found a room that breathed. Thousands of leather-bound volumes lined the walls, stretching toward a ceiling decorated with fading celestial maps. In the far corner, illuminated only by the dying embers in the hearth and a single desk lamp, sat Sangmin. He wasn't the iron-willed commander I'd seen in the conservatory. His head was bowed, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, and his fingers were tracing the delicate gold leaf on a first-edition volume of Dante's Inferno. He looked smaller in the dim light, stripped of the shadows that usually made him seem 10 feet tall. "My father had a copy of that," I said softly, my voice barely a ripple in the stillness. Sangmin didn't jump, but I saw his shoulders tense for a fraction of a second before he relaxed. He didn't look up as he spoke. "I know. This is his copy, Nina." I walked closer, my heart skipping a beat. "You kept his books?"
I kept everything the debt collectors tried to seize, he murmured, finally looking at me. Without the sharp daylight, his eyes seemed softer, filled with a weary sort of gold. I told myself it was for the value of the assets, but the truth is, I couldn't stand the thought of your history being sold off in pieces at a courthouse auction. I reached the desk, my hand trembling as I touched the spine of the book. It felt like a tether to a life that had been stolen from me. I looked at Sangmin, really looked at him, and saw the faint, jagged scar that ran from his jawline down into his collar. I saw the way his hand gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white, as if he were holding himself together by sheer force of will. You spend your whole life protecting things that don't belong to you, Sangmin. Who protects you, Sangmin? He let out a short, breathy laugh that lacked any humor. The thorns protect the rose, Nina, but nobody ever asks the thorns if they're tired of being sharp. He stood up then, the movement slow and heavy. The air between us seemed to thicken, vibrating with the same electric tension that had nearly consumed me in the apartment. He stepped around the desk, closing the distance until I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He was close enough that I could see the tiny golden flecks in his irises and the way his pupils dilated as he looked at my mouth.
The silence of the library was no longer empty. It was a living thing, pulsing with years of unspoken words and hidden gazes. Sangmin reached out, his hand hovering near my face. I expected him to grab me with the same proprietary force he'd used before, but his touch was agonizingly light. He used the back of his fingers to brush a stray lock of hair away from my forehead, his touch as delicate as a prayer. I shouldn't have brought you here, he rasped, his voice dropping to a low, hungry growl. I should have let you stay a ghost. It was safer for both of us when you were just a name on a page. I don't want to be safe anymore, I breathed, my own hand rising to rest against his chest. I could feel his heart hammering, not with the steady rhythm of a soldier, but with the frantic, desperate beat of a man who was starving for a connection he didn't think he deserved. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. The scent of sandalwood and old books enveloped me, and for a moment the world outside, the syndicates, the debt, the rain, ceased to exist. His breath hitched as his lips brushed against the corner of mine, a ghost of a touch that made my knees weak. It was a moment of pure, terrifying vulnerability, a crack in the marble that let me see the fire burning beneath. Just as his hand slid into the hair at the nape of my neck, pulling me inches closer, a sharp electronic chirp cut through the intimacy. Sangmin froze. The softness in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, tactical glass of the Mafia boss. He pulled back, the sudden distance feeling like a physical blow. He reached for the radio on his belt, his jaw tightening into that familiar, unyielding line. Testa, he barked into the device. The spell was broken. The library was just a room again, and the man standing before me was once again a fortress. He didn't look back at me as he strode toward the door, leaving me alone with my father's books and the taste of a kiss that hadn't quite happened. The heavy mahogany doors of the library hadn't even fully closed before the atmosphere of the estate shifted from a somber sanctuary to a coiled, lethal machine. The rhythmic chirp of Sangmen's radio was followed by a low percussive thud that vibrated through the floorboards, the unmistakable sound of a controlled breach. Sangmen didn't run, he accelerated with a predatory focus that made my breath hitch. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice no longer the rasping whisper of a man who loved books, but the cold, metallic snap of a general. He reached into the small of his back, and the silver glint of a handgun appeared in his hand, as if summoned from the shadows themselves.
We moved through the gallery, the dim yellow lights flickering as the estate's power grid hummed under the strain of a security override. At the top of the grand staircase, Sang Men pulled me into the shadow of a marble pillar. Below us, the foyer was a chaos of moving shadows. 3 men in tactical gear had smashed through the reinforced glass of the side entrance, their movements jagged and frantic. "They're early," Sang Men muttered, more to himself than to me. He didn't sound afraid, he sounded insulted. I watched, paralyzed, as he stepped out from behind the pillar. There was no hesitation, no wasted breath. In the space of 3 heartbeats, the air was punctuated by 3 suppressed pops, sharp, dry sounds like branches snapping in the cold. I didn't see the bullets, but I saw the results. 2 of the intruders crumpled instantly, their momentum vanishing as they hit the marble floor. The 3rd dove behind a decorative urn, his weapon spraying a desperate line of fire that chewed into the wood of the banister, inches from where we stood.
Sang Min's arm was steady, his eyes narrowed with a terrifying clinical detachment. He waited for the split second the shooter paused to reload, then leaned out. A single shot followed. The silence that rushed back into the foyer was deafening, broken only by the sound of the rain lashing against the broken glass. "Marco," Sang Min said into his radio, his gaze never leaving the bodies below. "Sweep the garden. They were a distraction. The real entry will be the basement vents." He turned to me then. His face was splattered with a tiny singular drop of oil, or perhaps something darker, and his eyes were still dilated from the rush of the kill. I expected to feel nothing but pure, unadulterated terror, and I did, but beneath it, a dark, confusing fascination began to take root. I had spent my life hiding from the world because I was afraid of being hurt, yet here was a man who stood in the center of the storm and forced the world to bow. He was a monster, but he was my monster. He saw the way I was looking at him, the way my eyes darted from the gun in his hand to the bodies in his foyer. For a fleeting second, the cold mask slipped, and I saw a flash of the man from the library, the one who had almost kissed me. He looked at his own hand, as if noticing the weapon for the first time, a flicker of shame crossing his features before he hardened once more. "I told you," he said, his voice a low, jagged rasp. "The thorns are sharp, Nina. This is the reality of the man you're standing behind. Do you want to go back to your books now?" I looked down at the foyer, then back at the jagged scar on his jaw. My world of soft sweaters and fairy lights was gone, shattered along with the glass downstairs. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I brushed the sleeve of his shirt, feeling the tension in his arm. "No," I whispered, the word tasting like copper and salt. "I'm not going back." He didn't smile, but his grip on the gun tightened, and he ushered me deeper into the house, away from the broken glass and into the heart of the fortress. The first strike was over, but the war had only just begun. The smell of burnt gunpowder lingered in the hallway, mixing with the sharp, clinical scent of the estate's cleaning solvents. Sang Min stood by the tall arched window of the gallery, his silhouette a jagged tear against the moonlight. He was meticulously cleaning the slide of his weapon with a white cloth, his movements rhythmic and hauntingly calm. The lethal efficiency he had just displayed felt like a wall between us, higher and thicker than any stone fortification. I watched him from the shadows, my heart still hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The adrenaline was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a cold, stinging clarity. I realized then that while he had saved my life, he was still treating me like a piece of high-value cargo, something to be stored, guarded, and kept at arm's length. "Is that all I am to you? An obligation? A line item in a ledger you decided to balance?" Sang Min didn't stop his work. "You are safe, Nina. That is all that matters." "Safe?" I took a step toward him, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. I was safe in my apartment, and I was dying of loneliness. Now I'm safe here, and I'm invisible all over again. You look at me, but you don't see me. You touch me like I'm made of glass that's already cracked.
He finally stopped. He set the gun down on a marble pedestal with a hollow clack and turned to face me. The moonlight hit the sharp angles of his face, making him look like a statue of a fallen god. "I am keeping you alive," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You're keeping me in a cage," I shouted, the frustration of years of isolation finally boiling over. "You pull me away from windows. You stay in the doorway of my room. You won't even look at me in the eye for more than a second. If you hate the sight of me so much, why didn't you just let them take me?"
Sung Min moved then, not with the calculated grace of a soldier, but with the raw, uncontrolled speed of a man who had reached his breaking point. He was across the hallway in an instant, his hands slamming into the wall on either side of my head, pinning me against the cold stone. His breath was hot, smelling of the bitter tea in the cold night air, and his eyes were burning with a ferocity that made my breath hitch. "You think I hate the sight of you?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. "I have spent 5 years memorizing the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're stressed. I know which window in your apartment has the best light at 3 in the afternoon because that's when I'd watch for your shadow. I didn't stay away because I didn't want you, Nina. I stayed away because I'm covered in blood, and you were the only clean thing I had left in this world." His restraint finally snapped. One hand left the wall to cup my jaw, his thumb brushing over my lower lip with a desperate, trembling pressure. "I kept my distance to keep you white as snow," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Every time I thought about knocking on your door, I looked at my hands and saw the ghosts of the men I've killed. I thought if I never touched you, I couldn't stain you. I thought if I stayed a shadow, you could keep your light. But tonight I realized that while I was trying to keep you clean, I was letting you wither away in the dark." The honesty of his confession was more staggering than any bullet. I saw the agony in his eyes, the soul-deep exhaustion of a man who had played the role of a monster to protect an angel he felt he could never deserve. "I don't care about being clean, Sung Min," I breathed, my hands reaching up to grip his wrists, pulling him closer until there was no air left between us. "I just want to be real. I want to be yours." He let out a jagged, broken sound, half sob, half growl, and leaned his forehead against mine. The wall of emotional restraint didn't just crumble, it vanished. In that moment, the Mafia boss was gone, and all that remained was a man who was finally tired of being a thorn. The transition from the fortress to the gala was a transformation of a different kind. If the estate was a cage of stone, the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a cage of gold and glass. Sung Min had spent the afternoon preparing me as if I were a weapon he was finally unveiling. I stood before the full-length mirror in the West Suite, barely recognizing the woman staring back. I was no longer draped in oversized wool and vulnerability. I was encased in a floor-length gown of midnight silk that clung to my skin like liquid shadow. A diamond choker sat tight against my throat, a beautiful, shimmering collar that signaled to the world exactly who I belonged to. "You look breathtaking," Sung Min said, appearing in the reflection behind me. He was in a tuxedo that made his broad shoulders look like they were carved from granite. He stepped close, his hand resting on the small of my back, his touch no longer hesitant, but possessive. "You look breathtaking. But remember, Nina, tonight you are not a guest. You are the queen of the Mino family. Every person in that room will be looking for a crack in your armor. Give them nothing but ice." I took a shaky breath, the weight of the diamonds feeling heavy. "I've spent 2 years being invisible, Sung Min. I don't know how to be a target." "You aren't a target," he murmured, his lips brushing against my temple. "You are the bait, and I am the trap." We entered the ballroom to a sudden, suffocating silence. The Ball of Shadows was a neutral ground gala, a place where the city's most dangerous players traded their guns for champagne flutes, but the air was thick with the scent of predatory intent.
As we walked down the grand staircase, I felt 1,000 eyes boring into me. I saw the whispered conversations, the narrowed gazes of men who dealt in blood, and the sharp, calculating stares of women who had survived by being more ruthless than their husbands.
Sang-min led me through the crowd with an effortless, terrifying grace. He didn't look at the people around us, he looked at me, his gaze never wavering, a silent command for me to keep my head high. I felt his pulse through the hand he held, steady and slow, a stark contrast to the frantic drumming of my own heart. "Smile, Nina," he whispered as we approached a circle of men in sharp suits. "Let them see how little their threats mean to us." I forced my lips into a cold, distant curve, a mask I had practiced in the library. I leaned into him, playing the role of the devoted, untouchable consort. We moved through a sea of polite masks and hidden daggers. I listened to Sang-min navigate the treacherous waters of Mafia diplomacy, his voice a smooth, dangerous baritone that commanded the room without ever rising. For hours I played the part. I endured the cold touches of allies and the veiled threats of rivals. I stood by his side as he negotiated territories and settled blood feuds, all while the Viper Syndicate watched from the periphery. I could feel them, the men in the shadows, the ones who had sent the roses. They were waiting for me to falter, for my hand to shake as I held my glass, for a single tear to betray the girl who had been curled on a Brooklyn floor. But as the night wore on, something shifted inside me. The fear that had paralyzed me for weeks began to harden into a sharp, cold resolve. I looked at the men who wanted to destroy us, and I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt the power of the man beside me, and for the first time I understood why he lived this way. There was a dark, intoxicating freedom in the danger. "They're moving," Sang-min said, his voice barely audible over the orchestra. I felt his grip on my waist tighten. "The Vipers, they've seen enough. They're going to try for you near the terrace." "I'm ready," I said, my voice surprised by its own strength. He looked down at me, a flash of genuine pride breaking through his icy exterior. "I know you are." As we moved toward the moonlit terrace, the gilded cage of the ballroom began to feel like a battlefield. The roleplay was over, the shadows were closing in, and the girl who was afraid of the dark was about to find out exactly what she was capable of when her back was against the wall. The transition from the gilded ballroom to the freezing terrace was like stepping from a dream into a sharp, jagged reality. The moon hung low over the city, casting the stone balustrades in a ghostly silver light. Sang-min's hand was a constant, grounding weight on my lower back, his eyes scanning the shadows with the intensity of a hawk. We were alone, or so it seemed, but the air felt heavy, saturated with the metallic scent of the river and the silent approach of something predatory. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the orchestra. I felt his grip on my waist tighten. "The Viper's move will be surgical. They want to isolate you without alerting the neutral security inside." But the enemy didn't play by the rules of surgical precision. A sudden, deafening crash erupted from the ballroom, the sound of a chandelier meeting the marble floor, followed by a wave of panicked screams. For a split second, Sang-min's instinct pulled his gaze toward the doors, toward the chaos he was sworn to manage. In that heartbeat of distraction, the shadows on the terrace moved. It happened with a terrifying, practiced silence. A canister of thick gray smoke skittered across the stone, erupting into a cloud that swallowed the moonlight. I felt a sudden violent jerk at my arm. "Sang-min!" I cried out, my voice swallowed by the hiss of the gas. "Nina!" His hand caught my fingertips, but the grip was slick, and the force pulling me away was immense.
A heavy arm wrapped around my throat, cutting off my air, while another hand clamped over my mouth. I was being dragged backward, away from the warmth of the gala, and toward the service stairs. I thrashed, my silk heels skidding on the stone, my heart exploding against my ribs. I could hear the muffled sounds of a struggle, the heavy thud of fists against flesh, and Sang Min's raw, guttural roar, but the smoke made us both blind.
I was shoved into the narrow, dark concrete of the stairwell. My captors were two men in matte black gear, their faces hidden by masks that made them look like insects. One of them gripped my wrist so hard I felt the bone groan. "Quiet, princess," he hissed, his voice a jagged edge of malice. "The boss has big plans for those pretty eyes." They thought I was the same girl from the Brooklyn apartment. They thought I was a fragile thing that would wilt the moment the lights went out. But as they dragged me down the first flight of stairs, the fear that had been my constant companion for years suddenly curdled into a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline. Sang Min had taught me that survival wasn't about strength, it was about the angle. As we reached the landing, I went limp. I let my knees buckle, becoming a dead weight in their arms. The man holding my wrist stumbled, his balance shifting forward. It was the only opening I needed. I didn't pull away, I leaned into him, driving the sharp 3-inch heel of my midnight silk stiletto into the bridge of his foot with every ounce of my weight. He let out a strangled yelp of pain, his grip loosening just enough. I didn't hesitate. I reached up and grabbed the heavy diamond choker at my throat, the shimmering collar Sang Min had placed there. With a violent tug, I snapped the clasp and swung the heavy, jewel-encrusted band like a weighted whip, the sharp edges of the diamonds catching the man across his eyes. He fell back, clutching his face, blinded by the very wealth he'd hoped to ransom. The second man lunged for me, but I was already moving. I didn't run down the stairs. I scrambled back up toward the terrace. I wasn't a ghost anymore, and I wasn't a target. I was the bait that had just bitten back. I burst through the door back onto the terrace just as the smoke began to clear. Sang Min was standing in the center of the wreckage, two men unconscious at his feet, his tuxedo jacket torn and his knuckles dripping red. He looked like a demon rising from the mist. When his eyes found mine, the sheer, agonizing relief that washed over his face was more intimate than any kiss. "Nina," he rasped, reaching for me. I didn't fall into his arms. I stood my ground, my chest heaving, the broken diamond necklace still clutched in my fist like a weapon. I looked at the man I loved, then at the chaos behind me. "They're coming," I said, my voice steady and cold, "and I'm done hiding." Sang Min didn't tell me to get behind him this time. He stepped to my side, his hand finding mine, and together we waited for the rest of the dark to show its face. The gala had been a feint, a blood-soaked invitation that led us back to the only place left to burn, the estate. By the time we reached the gates, the storm had reached a fever pitch, the sleet turning into a blinding white shroud that swallowed the stone walls. But the estate was no longer a silent fortress. The scent of wood smoke and ozone hung heavy in the air, and the orange flicker of a fire in the west wing licked at the dark sky. The Vipers hadn't just followed us, they had arrived first. Sang Min's car hadn't even come to a full stop before he was out, his movements a blur of lethal intent. He didn't look at the burning wing, his eyes were fixed on the heavy oak doors of the main entrance, which hung open like a broken jaw. "Marco, report," he barked into his radio, but only static answered.
He turned to me, his face a mask of cold, concentrated fury. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip tight enough to leave bruises through the midnight silk of my gown. "The safe room is in the basement, behind the wine cellar. The code is your birthday. Go, Nina. Lock the door and do not open it for anyone but me. Do you understand?" I looked at the house, the place where he had kept my father's books, where he had almost kissed me, and where he currently intended to die alone to ensure I lived. I looked at the blood on his knuckles and the desperation hidden deep in his flint-colored eyes. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the roar of the wind. Sang Min froze. This is not a debate. They are inside. They are armed. You are going to that room. I spent 5 years in a safe room, Sang-min, I shouted, stepping closer until our chests touched. I sat in that Brooklyn apartment and waited for life to happen to me, and it never did. I'm not going back into the dark while you stand out here and bleed for a debt that was never yours to pay. A secondary explosion rocked the estate, shattering a second-story window and showering the driveway in glass. Sang-min didn't flinch, but his eyes searched mine, looking for the girl who had been curled on the floor with her knees to her chest. He didn't find her. "I can't protect you if I'm worried about where you are," he rasped, his voice breaking. "Then stop protecting me and start fighting with me," I countered. I reached into the waistband of my gown, pulling out the small, sleek handgun Sang-min had taught me to prime during our quiet hours in the library. I hadn't told him I'd taken it from the bedside console. "You said you were my weakness, Sang-min. Let's show them why you were wrong." For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The fire, the rain, and the men inside didn't matter. There was only the choice between the girl I was and the woman I was becoming. Sang-min let out a jagged breath, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, a look of terrifying, beautiful pride. "Stay behind my left shoulder," he commanded, his voice dropping into a low, predatory growl. "If anyone moves, you take the legs, I'll take the rest." We entered the foyer together. The marble floor was a mosaic of broken glass and red rose petals, thousands of them, scattered by the vipers as a final mocking taunt. The scent was overwhelming, the sweet, cloying smell of dying flowers mixing with the acrid stench of smoke. Shadows detached themselves from the gallery above. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like strobes. I didn't scream, I didn't hide. I dropped to one knee behind the marble pillar, the cold stone biting into my skin, and I sighted the first man who dared to point a weapon at the man I loved. The roar of the gunfire was deafening, but my hand was steady. As the first viper fell, the silence of my old life was finally, irrevocably shattered. I wasn't a ghost, and I wasn't a mark. I was the fire that was going to burn the roses to ash. The smoke from the fire in the west wing curled into the freezing night sky, mingling with the first heavy flakes of a late-season snow. The estate was quiet now, a bruised silence that felt earned rather than forced. The vipers were gone. Some fled into the darkness, others remained as permanent fixtures of the marble floor, and the scent of gunpowder was slowly being washed away by the crisp, clean smell of the oncoming storm. I stood on the wide stone terrace, the same place where I had nearly been taken just hours before. My midnight silk gown was torn at the hem, and my hands were stained with soot, but I didn't feel the urge to hide. I didn't feel the need to curl into a ball and wait for the world to stop spinning. I stood tall, my shoulders square, watching the snow blanket the jagged cliffs.
The heavy glass doors creaked behind me. I didn't have to turn to know it was him. The air always seemed to pull toward Sang-min, a magnetic gravity that I no longer fought. He stepped up beside me, his movements slightly stiff, his tuxedo jacket discarded to reveal the dark bandages wrapping his shoulder. He looked at the snow, then at me, his expression a complex map of exhaustion and an intensity that made my heart ache. "The fire is contained," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that vibrated in the cold air. "Marco and the others are securing the perimeter. It's over, Nina. The debt is settled. The vipers won't be coming back." I looked at him, seeing the man who had lived his life as a thorn to protect a ghost. "And what about us? Is the silence coming back too?" Sang-min turned to face me fully, the cold blue light of the moon reflected in his eyes, but for the first time there was no ice in them. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second before he cupped my jaw.
His touch was firm, proprietary, and filled with a raw honesty that stripped away the last of my defenses. "I can't offer you the life you had," he whispered. "I can't promise you a world without shadows or a house without locks. I am still the man who marked that foyer with blood tonight." I leaned into his palm, closing my eyes for a brief second to savor the warmth of his skin. "That life I had was a slow death, Sang-min. I was safe, but I wasn't alive. I was a secret admirer of my own tragedy." I opened my eyes, looking directly into his. "I don't want to go back to being a ghost. I'd rather be a target by your side than a memory in that apartment." A small, genuine smile finally broke through his marble exterior, a rare, beautiful sight that felt like the first bloom of spring in a frozen wasteland. He pulled me closer, his arm wrapping around my waist, drawing me into the heat of his body. "The roses at your door were meant to be an end," he murmured, his forehead resting against mine. "But if you stay, I'll make sure the ones that grow here are different. No markings, no debts, just a life that belongs to you." "To us," I corrected. The snow began to fall in thick, silent curtains, muffling the world around us. In my old life, I would have been inside, watching the flakes through a locked window, feeling the chill of my own isolation. But here, standing on the edge of a cliff in the arms of a man the world feared, I felt a strange, intoxicating heat. I looked down at the courtyard, where the red petals were being buried under a layer of pure white snow. The past was being covered, the stains of the night disappearing. I wasn't the girl in the soft sweater anymore. I was a woman who had seen the fire and chosen to stay in the heat. "Let's go inside," Sang-min said, his voice a promise of a future I was finally brave enough to claim. "It's cold out here." "No," I said, looking up at the sky, letting the snowflakes melt against my skin. For the first time in a long time, I actually feel the air. He didn't argue. He simply tightened his grip, standing as my shield and my equal as we watched the world turn white together. The roses were gone, but as I stood there in the freezing night, I realized that I had finally found a way to bloom in the dark.